So we're going to go through the entirety of the football example and actually build the entire visualization from scratch here using the football2 directory. And I'm working in the football3 directory, which will be the final solution that you can actually download from the CS205 Git release server. Though let's go ahead and get started. So just like all of our visualizations, we have started off with the boilerplate code, and we have some data that we're bringing in via the scores.json file, which we can look at the scores.json in our res directory and find out that every single data point is going to have exactly 10 different keys, and each of those keys we can access through each of our Ds. So let's first do what we did on Thursday in class, which was to grab a unique set of teams to create our scale. So we're going to go ahead and say that we're going to do scales here. And the first thing we're going to do is grab every single unique team. So the problem is that right now data has a lot of entries for Washington State, for Youngstown State and Western Kentucky and Washington and so forth. And what we want to do is make sure that we have the opponent listed only one time. We talked about there's this idea of having a pluck, which is to pick out something from the array, and we do that through a series of two commands. First one, we say teams is equal to the data.map with a function d, and then we're going to return just the element that we want, so that is d at opponent. So now teams is going to have all of an array of just our opponents. Let's actually output this in a console.log and see what teams really has. We save it, we switch over to web browser, we refresh it, and we look at the JavaScript console, which you'll see our output shows an array of a whole bunch of different teams. So it has a total of 1,189 entries. The next thing that we did in class was said we only want a unique set of teams. So we can say teams is equal to d3.set of teams.values, and that should result in only unique teams being in our array. If we save and refresh it, now our array has only 127 elements. Those are the 127 different teams we have played. So going back to the code, we can actually create the ordinal scale for these teams. So we do a team scale, or teams scale, is equal to d3.scale.ordinal. And then our range is going to be all of the teams, our domain is going to be all of our teams, and our range is going to be a series of points instead of a band. Because we're using an ordinal scale, we either need to use range points or range bands instead of just range. We're going to use range points, and we're going to say that our teams are going to be listed vertically, so it's going to go from 0 to height. Next, we want to go ahead and have the other scales. So we said that our y-axis is going to be the years. So each year will have a point. And we argued that the years are actually bin data. That is categorical data, and we should also use an ordinal scale for that. So our year scale is d3.scale.ordinal. And then we can do this exact same thing for the years if we want to. So let's go ahead and just do, instead of var teams, we're going to have var years. And our CSV file has year being the key. So at year, d3.set years. And let's go ahead and console.log out the years just to make sure it is what we think it is. And I'm going to comment out the year scale line since it's not complete yet. And awesome, we've got lots of 2014s. So we need years is equal to years. There we go. And okay, now we only have each year being exactly unique. Awesome. 1892 all the way up to 2014. So our scale now, our year scale is an ordinal scale. The domain is our years. And the range points again is going to be 0 to width. So now we have a year scale for our year data, which is going to be our planar variable on the y-axis, a ordinal scale for our opponents, which is going to be our planar variable on the x-axis, and now we can actually make this visualization. So using their starting boilerplate code, we've got a circle. We're going to go ahead and set the attribute center x, and that's going to be a function d comma I, where we're going to return the x-axis is going to be the left right, so we're going to use years. So year scale at d at year is going to be our year, and attribute cy is going to be a function d comma I, just like all of our functions, and we are going to return a team scale d at opponent. And the last thing we need to do to find a circle is have a radius, which we'll set to 3 for right now, which we'll change later. Saving that again, let's see if this looks right. And we have lots and lots of dots. Awesome. Let's go ahead and add some axis labels to give us some context of what we're looking at. So what we'll go ahead and do is we will define axes down here. So axis. Axis. And the first thing we'll do is go ahead and say the team's axis is going to be d3.svg.axis. And then we're going to have our scale is going to be the team scale. And the orient of the axis is going to be to the left, because we want the teams to be listed vertically and the labels are going to be to the left of the data. So we'll have this this axis show up on the left side of our visualization. And then we actually need to draw this team axis. So we have svg.append g. We go ahead and set the attribute class is equal to axis, and then we call the team axis. And again, making a very small change, testing it out, and something broke. Okay, that's good. So we looked at debugger, team axis not defined. It says it's on line 64. So looking at line 64, team axis, I didn't spell teams correctly, and saving it. Okay, and now we have the teams. Looks like the teams are chopped off, so let's go ahead and give us some more margin space on the left so we don't chop off the teams. I'm going to jump this up to 150 pixels to the left. Okay, looks good. So right now we've got a lot of extra space. Let's go ahead and scrunch down the visualization a little bit so we don't have so much space, so we need to decrease the height of this visualization. So right now our height is set to the data times 20. So instead of doing that, let's go ahead and get our teams set up. I'm going to move this teams declaration to above the boilerplate. It doesn't depend on the margin, width, height, or SVG. None of those variables are mentioned here. So we can go ahead and do this. And our height will be the length of the teams times 20. So every team gets 20 pixels. Save this. Okay, nice. So now we've got a visualization of all of the teams. Let's go ahead and add the years axis to see what we're actually looking at. So the next axis we want to add is years axis, d3.svg.axis. Our scale is going to be the years scale. We're going to orient this to the top. And we can do svg.append of g, attribute class axis, and call years axis. Okay, we've sort of a mess of different points, but we have them all listed. So let's go ahead and fix this up a little bit. So we don't want every point to be labeled. So we can tell D3 to explicitly only label certain points on our axis. So to do that, it's going to be part of the svg.axis call. And we can do this by changing up the axis, svg.axis. Our year scale is going to be the one that we want to modify. And we can tell it exactly what tick values we want it to display. And that is an array that's going to contain all the values we want it to display. So we know the range is, we know 2014 is an important year because it's the last point in our data. We can say 2000, maybe 1980, 1960, 1940, 1920, 1900, and 1894 is going to be our last year shown. So I'm going to say show only those tick values. Let's see that change. Awesome. So now we have all of the values from 1894, which now I'm thinking 1894 may not be the final year. Let's look at our data set. Uh, 1892 is our final year. Okay. 1892. Okay, now we're lined up right here. Everything looks good. So now we have the years labeled as well as the schools. Nice. So let's go ahead and add a little bit to this visualization. This kind of looks pretty boring. The first thing we can do is we're going to add color, and let's go ahead and color it based on our wins. So attribute of fill, which will define the fill color, depends on d comma I, and we are going to say if d at whether or not we won. So whether or not we won is stored in result. So if d at result is a win, then we want to return a blue color. Otherwise, we're going to want to return a red color. All right, so now we have blue in line A, blue for winning, a red for losing. So can we add to this? Let's do something more to make them not block out so much. I'm going to use a slightly transparent color. You go ahead and HSL color picker, and we're going to pick a blue color, make it a little darker, and make it semi-transparent, maybe like a 0.5 here. Okay, and I'll copy this HSLA. So our blue is going to be this blue color. Our red, this looks like good red. So this is going to be our red color. Let's refresh our visualization. All right, so this didn't quite turn out to be how I want, but I think as colors overlap, we will be able to see how this looks. So what I envisioned when I started this is we're going to have bigger and bigger circles as our win streak continues. So the size of the radius isn't always going to be fixed at 3, but it's going to change based on if we won the previous year. So the radius is now also going to be a function d comma I, and this radius is going to be initially equal to, let's say 2, and our current year is d at year, and our opponent is d at opponent. And now I'm going to make a function And I'm first going to say I want to not be on this year, but take look at last year. So I'm going to say year equals year minus 1. And I'm going to say while did Illinois win against the opponent in opponent and the year in year. And while this is true, we're going to take 1 away from year and give 1 to the radius. So every year Illinois won against an opponent, we're going to check if they keep winning year after year after year, and then we're going to return the radius. So if we won no games, our radius will be 2, or no games in a row. If we've won last year's, our radius will be 3. If we won the last 2 years, our radius will be 4. And we'll kind of keep going, so our radius will grow larger and larger as we have kind of been on a win streak against a particular team. So all we need to do to finish this up is actually write the did Illinois win function. So somewhere outside of this SVG chain, I'm going to go ahead and say helper functions. I'm going to say, and a function in JavaScript is just a variable. So var did Illinois win is equal to a function. And the function we're passing into this function, the opponent and the year. So we want to know, did Illinois win against that opponent at that year? So what we can do is we can just do a for loop for var equals 0, I is less than data.length, I plus plus. And we can say var d is equal to data.I, just since we're familiar with using d. We can say if the data we're looking at right now, year is equal to year, and is the data that we're looking at opponent equal to the opponent. And if the year and the opponent matches, then we can say if d at result is a win, we can return true. If we never return true, we want to return false because we didn't win. And we can go ahead and put an else statement here to return false early if we find out that we actually lost against that game, but that isn't strictly necessary. So we're going to return what the result is. And this should now check whether or not Illinois won and increase the radius. So let's see if this works if we get an error. Oh, nice. It worked out. So we have is these streaks. So in the 1940 to about 1950, it looks like, we had a nice win streak against Iowa until we didn't play them for like almost 20 years. Had a nice win streak against Purdue. Nice win streak against Wisconsin. Nice. So we've kind of got this win streak data going that really highlights when we've been on a streak. We could do the inverse and say, did Illinois win actually returns a loss streak? We can see, we've had quite a loss streak against Ohio State. And in fact, right up until 2014, we were in the middle of a loss streak against Ohio State. Michigan, also quite a loss streak growing. So an interesting data set. Notice the last color is going to be a different color because that's going to be when we win. But I think we want to focus on wins. So let's go ahead and keep the kind of winning. This is the Illinois winning streak. And now let's give us the ability to actually look at each individual data point. So when we hover over it, we can show a tooltip. For that, we're going to use a D3 add-on called d3.tip. d3-tip. And the GitHub result is the library. And what d3.tip will do is it allows us to hover over something and it'll show us a little tooltip above it. So to use it, I've already included in the web directory that comes down with this, the d3.tip that I downloaded from the GitHub. And in the index.html, I included a line before our visualization that says we're going to include d3.tip. So we have to download the library, add it to our web directory, and then include it in the HTML page. Then when we call viz.js, we're able to use the d3.tip. So to actually use it, we need to do 3 things. We have to first initialize it. So we're going to initialize this tooltip. We'll go ahead and do this in the helper functions. So we'll say var tip is equal to d3.tip attribute, and then it's going to have this function d, which is what we want the tip to say. We're going to leave this the same right now. And then the second thing we need to do is invoke in the context of our visualization. So viz.call is tip. What we actually want to do here is we don't call our visualization viz, we call it svg. So svg.call of tip. And then the last thing we want to do is we want to call the tip on the mouse over. So all we do down here for the circles is on mouse over tip.show, on mouse out tip.hide. So this is just like the .attribute function, but this is the .on function. On the mouse over or on the mouse out, we hide or show the tip. So if I refresh, as I hover over things, it shows object, object. So it tried to write out the value of d, which is the d3 tip here, and the function just returns d. So instead of just returning d, we want to return stuff about d. So what we really want to say is Illinois, and then we can say d location. So this will say Illinois versus or Illinois at. We'll add a space. So Illinois at, and then the opponent name. And then to enter a new line in HTML, it's BR. So Illinois at Michigan. And then let's have the score. So we'll have the Illini score. So d at Illini score dash opponent score. So if we refresh this, now we show Illinois, Iowa 42-28. So this looks kind of hard to read. Let's go ahead and stylize it. One thing that you see is in this D3, the d3.tip has this .attribute set, the class attribute. And in this class attribute, we see that it sets a class called d3.tip. That's going to style, or d3-tip, that's going to style how the tip actually looks. So to do that, we can go to the HTML and add some CSS styling to it. So we'll go ahead and do style, d3-tip, and we'll just say background color is white. And now you can see we have a white box. We can put a border, solid 1 pixel black, and we can put a little bit of padding so it doesn't get so close to the border. All right, so now we've got this tooltip that looks okay. We can definitely improve how it looks, but it gets us to our data quite a bit more pleasant. In fact, there is some CSS that we can include that will help us, that will give it some example style sheets. So instead of doing this, let's see what the default D3 tip style sheet is. So I can include this line instead. And this gives it, a nice little, it's got a little arrow at the end. It kind of shows off our data in a nice kind of semi-transparent black box. Looks nice. So the only thing I think that's missing is we see what the score is. We see where we're playing. We don't know what year it is. So let me add that to our tooltip. So after the opponent, let's add parentheses, d at year, close parentheses, now our new line. we append it. So Illinois at Iowa in 1952, we won 33-13. Nice. So the next thing we can do is actually do more than just hover over it, but let's have it fade out everything that's not the current thing we're looking at. Because it's going to be nice to sort of not be bothered with everything else when we just want to focus on how we've done against Iowa. So to do that, we're going to do another mouse over or mouse out. And you can only have one of these. You're not allowed to actually have two on mouse over. It's going to take whatever the latest value is. So what we'll do is we're actually going to, instead of saying tip.show, what we can do is we can have, and the on is the exact same thing as everything else, that takes a function d comma I, and we can do tip, inside this function, we can do tip.show d comma I. So what happened beforehand was that there was just a tip.show function that was being passed the parameters d comma I. Now we're making our own function that passed the parameters d comma I. And then we want to also fade we'll fade everything to 0.1. So for doing that, we're going to be able to have things look generally semi-transparent for this. And in fact, let's, instead of saying fade 0.1, we can actually just write the code right here. So what we want to do is we want to say in our visualization, our SVG, we want to select all of the circles, and then we want to, we right now have all of them. We don't want to fade all of them. We want to fade just a specific subset of them. So we want to filter, and then filter doesn't have any other parameters except for a function d. So we're going to filter, and we're not going to call this function d because d is already used here. So we need to access this. So we're going to call this e for each element that we're looking at. E is still going to be a single piece of data. So what we're going to do is we're going to say if the element that we're looking at, opponent, so if the element that we're looking at, opponent, is not equal to the data that we're looking at, to opponent, then we want to filter it. So we can go ahead and just say return whether or not our opponent for each piece of data that we are, of our entire data set, so E is our entire data set that we're going to be going through, and D is going to be the current opponent that we're mousing over. So it's got two different variables, so we're just going to say E being every piece of data. If the opponent for each piece of data isn't our current opponent, then we want to apply a transition. And what we want this transition to do is we want to style the element, and we want to set the opacity to 0.1. So if this works, when we hover over something, we should see everything else fade out. So fade is not defined. Okay. So line 142. Right. So we decided not to write this fade function, so that makes sense. Now let's see if we. So didn't actually work. All right, let's see what's going on. So the first thing we can see is, are we calling filter at all? So we can say console.log called filter. we're not even calling filter at all. Ooh. So what that's implying is our select all, so we're not getting an error, so we know this code is running, but that means our select all is selecting nothing. So this is happening because the group we're selecting is actually not a real group. Let's go ahead and set the attribute style. For each circle, it can be a football team. We'll do football-team. And now what we'll do in our select all is we'll do select.football-team. And we use a dot to indicate that it's a style. So because this is a style, it's what's called a CSS selector. It's going to be a style of a football team. We're going to select everything that's part of the group football team. Let's see if that fixes things. It doesn't. So let's even see if this line is getting run. So console.log running mouse over. Okay, it's running the mouse over. It's definitely getting there. But then when it does the svg.selectAll, it never runs the filter. So it never lets us do the transformation. Not style, sorry. This is, style defines individual styles that you can put on. So when we want to style something like the opacity down here, we styled that. But when we actually want to define something to be part of something, it's part of a class, which classes do define styles. So we want to set the class equal to the thing that we identify before the dot. That way we can actually select it. So let's see if this did it. Awesome. Okay. So what we see going on is, if I refresh one more time, is as we hover over something, everything else gets faded out. And if we hover over something else, everything and all gets faded out. So this is because we have faded the things that are not our current team. So what we want to do now is make sure that we, on the mouse out, that we fade out. So function d comma I, and now we want to first do, and I'm going to take out these console.log since now we're done debugging. And we're just going to copy and paste this whole thing. And instead of d.tip, we're going to instead of tip.show, we're going to have tip.hide. And then our function, we're going to set the opacity to be 1. So we're basically hiding the tip and resetting the opacity. And if we refresh this, now we're going to hover over Iowa. And awesome, everything else fades out except for Iowa. Now when we're not on an Iowa data point, everything else fades out except for what we're selecting. Nice. So now we can really explore the different games and see the various different fields. Nice. So now we can adjust a lot of different parameters. So for example, if we feel like we want to really emphasize streaks, we can say we're going to increase the radius by 2 every time we have a streak. So now the bubbles get even bigger more quickly. Really shows off the streak. The streaks almost go outside of the bounds of their little area, but it really highlights when we're on a streak, when we're on a roll. It really shows that sort of the early 1980s looks like we were on several streaks at a time. And then as we're Getting to more recent times, we haven't had many strong streaks, but we've had several wins against other schools. So these looks like a lot of non-conference schools that we've played down here. So we can do even ridiculous things. We can double the radius every time, which should create an enormous circle for this Iowa thing. And it's a whole different kind of visualization at this point. So this is clearly not that meaningful, but we can see this massive, some of these dots don't even show up, but there is these massive data points that we can hover over and see things about. All right, so I think the radius +1 is a good place to stop. So we've got this data set. We went through, we debugged it. We now have this nice visualization of Illinois games that we have a mouseover effect that shows a tip, and we have a mouseover effect that fades out all the other regions that we haven't looked at. So the only other thing that we haven't really covered here is clicking on something and doing a transition based on click, but we'll get to that soon, because we want to really dive into sort of just having one visualization where we transform other elements within this visualization for right now. So this code will be uploaded as part of football scores 3. So 2 was where you worked on in class. I'll upload this as 3 so that you have the finished code in 3. You can download this branch using the regular commands, and you'll have the football 3 branch, or football scores 3 branch rather. And that will show off the visualization. And you should be able to just run this just right away on your computer. All right, I hope this was helpful. Thanks.